And so we find ourselves now as the inheritors of this. The second thing that Murray Sinclair said that I think is true and is hard is to say it took us a long time to get into this mess. It's going to take us a while to get out of it. But getting out of it requires action and requires movement. And without getting into too much of the detail, you know, we've seen some efforts made and things done to try to get us to a better place. We've seen some things said, done in some cases, but we've got a long, long way to go. And I want to try and outline just some basic things that we are going to need to come to grips with as Canadians. I know that perhaps the most common mythology among Canadians today, in addition to the discovery and the myth of discovery and the myth of surrender, the other myth is, you know, that was then, this is now, and we're spending way too much money on First Nations. And it's wasted, and it's taken away, and there's corruption, and it's all bad, and we've just got to stop that, and we've got to let them be just like us. Well, you know, somebody was giving me this argument the other day, and I said, you know, first of all, per capita, for kids in education and in healthcare and on housing, we actually spend much, much, much less on Indigenous people than we do on everybody else. Go to a school on a reserve and compare it to what we're providing. Look at this facility here. I mean, Max Blau is the president of the university with us. 22 buildings have been built in Brantford by Wilfrid Laurier University. How many buildings like this are there on any Indian reserve in Northern Ontario? Don't rush to it. I can answer zero, zero, zero. So we really have to say to ourselves, we have got to take a huge step in recognizing that if we want to get to self-government, if we want to get to a mutual relationship that respects the dignity of difference, but recognizes the fundamental principle of equality, it's going to cost us. And I have a very simple formula, and that is to say, look, in the Canadian Constitution, we say the principle of equalization is in place that says if you're living in Prince Edward Island, you have access to services of a roughly similar nature to those that you will find in other provinces. We do that, and we send equalizers. You know, Ottawa sends greater payments to some provinces than others because of this lack of equality. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has found that it is discriminatory to be funding child welfare services at a level that is substantially lower than we're spending in non-Aboriginal communities. It's wrong. It must change. And so my step forward is to say, if we think and believe, that I certainly do, that the First Nations are an order of government that is worthy of equal respect to that of any other government in this country, then they should be funded on an equal basis. If we did that, it would be revolutionary. It would be expensive. People would raise their eyes and say, well, wait a minute. Say, well, we don't have to spend it all in one day. But we have to set out a plan as to how are we going to get there. And it has to be based on these two things that I've said: self-government and equality. Self-government because all of the evidence strongly points in one direction. And that is that we have taken away from First Nations the ability to actually make effective decisions for themselves. We've done that by forcing them to continue to ask and to beg and to wheedle and cajole and say, we need this, we need that, we need more, we need this. And we've never, ever recognized what sovereignty actually should mean. The 24,000 people who are members of the Six Nations community, the Six Nations nation, should not be forced to beg on their hands and knees. They should have a settlement which recognizes that much of their land was stolen from them in that same 19th century where I've described this evil trinity of public policy. And it's true, it was stolen from them. The evidence is overwhelming that it was stolen from them. And so there has to be compensation for that. There has to be recognition from that. And there has to be, going forward, there has to be a recognition that there is a government here that needs to have the revenues that it requires. All governments require land, and all governments require revenue. And if we're going to have Indigenous governments, they need land and they need revenue. And they don't have it. We put them on little postage stamps of land dotted across the country, 650 of them, and say, go to it. What? And then we express surprise at the fact that, yeah, there are serious social and other issues. But you say, yes, but look at the generational cost that we've imposed on them. So what is amazing today to me is not that this is going to be a big challenge for governments and a big challenge for all of us as Canadians. What's amazing for me is the resilience and, yes, the patience of First Nations people. First of all, resilience. Remember those population numbers I described in the 19th century? The assumption that this was a population that would disappear? Despite our very best efforts of governments over many, many generations, not only has Indigenous population not disappeared, it's quite the opposite. It's the fastest growing and youngest population in Canada. And it is profoundly resilient. We have more people going colleges and universities. We have more people going into every profession. We have more successful First Nations and Aboriginal businesses than ever before. The success stories are dramatic and they are widespread across a very wide spectrum of the country. But it could be even more successful. And don't think that the patience will last forever. Because injustice always comes with a price. And we're seeing now in the younger generation of First Nations, we're seeing a greater awareness, a greater knowledge, and yes, a greater and understandably a greater impatience. And that will continue. That won't go away. The progress that we made since the 1960s to today, through all the battles and the constitutional differences and all of the arguments, we have seen quite dramatic changes across the country in governance, in education, but there's still so much more to do.